"You don't matter," my mom said, doing what was supposed to be my birthday dinner. So I replied with this: "Their lives were never the same again." When you hear what I said and how it completely destroyed their perfect family image, you'll understand why sometimes the most powerful response is the one nobody sees coming. My name is Vivienne Blackwood, and I'm 32 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And the way I found out changed everything. Not just for me, but for every single person sitting around that mahogany dining table in Millbrook Heights on what should have been the happiest day of my year. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before that night. I was the middle child in the prestigious Blackwood family of Millbrook Heights, Connecticut. My father, Harrison Blackwood, owned the most successful investment firm in 3 counties. My mother, Cordelia, was the kind of woman who organized charity galas and made sure her name appeared in the society pages of the Hartford Courant at least twice a month. We lived in a colonial mansion with white pillars and perfectly manicured hedges that looked like something out of a magazine. And me? I was the responsible one. Always had been. While my older brother Sterling was busy being the golden boy, captain of his lacrosse team at Yale, summa cum laude graduate, now following in Dad's footsteps at Blackwood Investments, and my younger sister Ophelia was playing the role of the artistic free spirit who could do no wrong despite dropping out of 3 different colleges, I was the one who kept my head down and did everything right. I graduated from Brown University with a 3.8 GPA in economics. I got my MBA from Wharton. I worked 60-hour weeks at a consulting firm in Manhattan, lived in a modest but respectable apartment in Brooklyn, and sent my parents anniversary cards, birthday cards, and thoughtful Christmas gifts every single year. I was the daughter who called every Sunday, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who offered to help whenever there was a family crisis. I was reliable, dependable, boring, according to some, but I thought that meant something. I thought being the steady one, the one they could count on, made me valuable to them. I thought it made me matter. The drive from Brooklyn to Millbrook Heights that October evening should have been pleasant. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and gold, and I'd taken the scenic route through the Connecticut countryside, listening to a playlist I'd made specifically for the occasion. I was actually excited about this birthday dinner, which was unusual for me. Birthdays in the Blackwood family were typically formal affairs, expensive restaurants, stilted conversation, and gifts that felt more like obligations than expressions of love. But this year, Mom had insisted on hosting at the house. "Just family," she'd said when she called to invite me. "Something more intimate this time, Vivienne. I think it's important for us to really connect as a family." Those words had warmed something inside me that I hadn't realized had grown cold. When was the last time any of them had expressed interest in connecting with me? When was the last time I'd felt like they actually wanted me there, not just expected me to show up? I'd even bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald green wrap dress that complemented my auburn hair and made my green eyes pop. I'd had my hair styled that afternoon at a salon in Soho, and I was wearing the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. I wanted to look good. I wanted them to see me, really see me, and be proud of the woman I'd become. The Blackwood estate sat on 5 acres of pristine Connecticut real estate, complete with a circular driveway that curved around a fountain featuring 3 marble cherubs. As I pulled my modest Honda Civic up behind Sterling's BMW and Ophelia's vintage Volkswagen van, a graduation gift from our parents, despite the fact that she'd never actually graduated, I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety in my stomach. I'd grown up in this house, but I never felt like I belonged here. Everything was too perfect, too polished, too expensive. The Persian rugs probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The crystal chandelier in the foyer had been imported from Prague. Even the doorknobs were made of genuine brass. I rang the doorbell, another family tradition that always struck me as odd. Why did I need to ring the doorbell at my childhood home? But Cordelia insisted on it. "It sets the proper tone," she'd always said. Esperanza, our longtime housekeeper, answered the door with a warm smile. She'd been with the family since I was 10,
and she's one of the few people in that house who'd ever made me feel truly welcome. "Miss Vivienne!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. "You look beautiful, mija, so grown up." "Thank you, Esperanza. How are the grandkids?" Her face lit up as she led me into the foyer. "Miguel just started high school, and little Sophia is reading at a 5th grade level, and she's only in 2nd grade. But listen to me, going on and on. Your family is waiting for you in the living room." The living room was exactly as I remembered it. All cream-colored furniture and oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors. A fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace, and someone had arranged white roses in crystal vases throughout the room. It looked like a spread from Architectural Digest.
Sterling was standing by the fireplace, wearing a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, looking every inch the successful investment banker. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was the kind that had charmed investors out of millions of dollars over the years. His wife, Celeste, sat perched on the edge of the sofa like a beautiful bird. Her platinum hair swept up in a chignon that probably took 2 hours to achieve. She was wearing a designer cocktail dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Ophelia was curled up in the wingback chair by the window, her long, dark hair falling in carefully tousled waves over her shoulders. She was wearing a flowing bohemian dress and enough silver jewelry to set off a metal detector, trying to look like the tortured artist she'd been playing at for the past decade. Despite dropping out of Parsons, RISD, and the Art Institute of Chicago, she somehow still managed to position herself as the creative one in the family. And there were my parents. Harrison stood behind the bar cart, mixing what looked like martinis, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier light. At 65, he was still imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of presence that commanded attention in boardrooms and country clubs alike. He wore his authority like an expensive suit, and it fit him perfectly. Cordelia sat in her usual spot on the sofa, the position that gave her the best view of the entire room and allowed her to monitor everyone's behavior. At 61, she was still stunning in that cold, classical way that some wealthy women manage to maintain well into their golden years. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect bob, her makeup was flawless, and she was wearing a cocktail dress with a strand of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. "There's our birthday girl," Harrison announced as I entered the room, but something in his tone felt off, too cheerful, too forced. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Cordelia said, rising to give me an air kiss that barely grazed my cheek. "You look nice." Nice. Not beautiful, not stunning, not even pretty. Nice. The kind of compliment you give to someone's haircut when you can't think of anything genuinely positive to say. "Thank you," I replied, accepting a martini from my father and taking a seat on the sofa opposite Celeste. "This is lovely. Thank you all for making time for dinner." "Of course," Sterling said, though he was checking his phone as he spoke. "Big deal closing tomorrow, and the Tokyo markets are..." "Sterling." Cordelia's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "Tonight is about family." There was something in her tone that made everyone in the room go still. Ophelia looked up from her phone, Celeste stopped adjusting her jewelry, Sterling put his phone away entirely. Right, of course. Family first. We made small talk for about 20 minutes while we finished our drinks. Sterling talked about his latest acquisition deal. Celeste discussed the charity luncheon she was organizing for the Junior League. Ophelia mentioned her latest art project, something involving found objects and mixed media that sounded suspiciously like expensive garbage to me, but everyone nodded along as if she were the next Picasso. I talked about my work, about the new client I'd landed, about the promotion I was hoping for, but I could see their eyes glazing over. Business consulting wasn't glamorous enough for the Blackwood family dinner table conversation. It wasn't making millions like Sterling's work, and it wasn't creatively fulfilling like Ophelia's artistic pursuits. It was just practical, reliable, boring. When Esperanza announced that dinner was ready, we all filed into the dining room like we were processing into a courtroom. The mahogany table was set with the good china, the spode Christmas tree pattern that only came out for special occasions. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the chandelier above, and someone had arranged a centerpiece of white lilies and baby's breath. My seat was at the far end of the table, facing my parents at the head. Sterling sat to my father's right, Celeste beside him. Ophelia was at my mother's left. It was the same seating arrangement we'd had since childhood, and suddenly it struck me how that arrangement told a story. The important people sat close to the heads of the table. The less important people got relegated to the far end. Dinner was my supposed favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and Duchess potatoes, but as I cut into the perfectly cooked beef, I realized it hadn't been my favorite meal in years. Maybe it had been when I was 12, but my tastes had evolved since then. Had anyone bothered to ask what I actually liked now? Did anyone even care? The conversation during dinner was stilted, formal. We discussed the weather, the stock market, the new family that bought the Morrison estate down the road. But there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't identify. People kept glancing at each other when they thought I wasn't looking. Celeste kept fidgeting with her napkin. Ophelia was unusually quiet. And my parents kept exchanging these meaningful looks across the table, like they were having an entire conversation with their eyes. "So, Vivienne," my mother said as Esperanza cleared the dinner plates, "how are things with David?"
David was the lawyer I'd been dating for about 6 months. He was nice enough, stable, successful, appropriately educated, but there wasn't much spark between us. We'd probably end up breaking up within the next month or two, but I hadn't mentioned that to my family yet. "Fine," I said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," Cordelia replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that at your age, most women are thinking about settling down, having children, building a real life." There it was, the subtle dig about my single status. My childless state, my apparent failure to achieve the kind of life they deemed real. "I have a real life, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I have a career, an apartment, friends." "Of course you do, dear," she said, in that patronizing tone that made my teeth itch. "I just meant, well, a meaningful life, a life that matters." Before I could respond to that loaded statement, Esperanza returned with the birthday cake. It was beautiful, 3 layers of chocolate with vanilla buttercream, decorated with delicate sugar flowers. She'd even written, "Happy 32nd birthday, Vivienne," in elegant script across the top. Everyone sang happy birthday, but their voices sounded hollow, like they were going through the motions. When the song ended, I blew out the candles and made a wish. I wished for my family to finally see me, to finally appreciate me for who I was. I should have been more careful about what I wished for. "Before we have cake," my mother announced, folding her hands in front of her, "your father and I have something we need to discuss with you." The room went dead silent. Even Esperanza, who was cutting the cake in the corner, seemed to freeze. "What kind of discussion?" I asked, though I was starting to feel sick to my stomach. Harrison cleared his throat. "Vivienne, as you know, your mother and I have been reviewing our estate planning recently." I nodded. They'd mentioned something about updating their wills a few months ago, but I hadn't thought much about it. Estate planning was just something wealthy people did periodically. "And in the course of that review," Cordelia continued, "we've had to make some difficult decisions about how to distribute our assets among our children." My heart started beating faster. "Okay." "The thing is," my father said, his voice taking on that business-like tone he used during board meetings, "we've had to consider each child's contribution to the family, their potential, their ability to carry on the Blackwood legacy." I looked around the table. Sterling was staring at his hands. Celeste was examining her manicure. Ophelia was picking at a loose thread on her dress. Nobody would meet my eyes. "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to suspect that I understood perfectly. Cordelia leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "Vivienne, we've decided that Sterling will inherit the business and the majority of the estate. Ophelia will receive the house in the Hamptons and a substantial trust fund to support her artistic endeavors." "And me?" I asked, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "You'll receive a modest sum," Harrison said, dismissively. "Enough to be comfortable, but nothing substantial. You see, we've had to be practical about this." "Practical?" I repeated, feeling like I was floating outside my own body. The truth is, Cordelia said, and her voice was so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it made what came next even more devastating. You don't matter. Not the way Sterling and Ophelia do. You never have. And we're tired of pretending otherwise. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then go cold. My hands started trembling, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. You don't matter. The phrase echoed in my head like a death sentence. 32 years of trying to be the perfect daughter, of being responsible and reliable and good, and this is what it got me? This is how they really saw me? I looked around the table again, desperate for someone to speak up, to defend me, to tell me this was all some kind of cruel joke. But Sterling was still studying his hands, Celeste was scrolling through her phone, Ophelia was now actively ignoring me, pretending to be fascinated by the chandelier above. None of them were surprised by this revelation. They'd all known. They'd probably discussed it amongst themselves for months, maybe years. I was the only one who'd been kept in the dark about my own worthlessness. But then something strange happened. Instead of crumbling, instead of breaking down in tears or begging them to reconsider, I felt something else entirely. Something cold and sharp and crystalline clear settled in my chest. Rage. Pure, focused rage. But not the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream and throw things. This was different. This was surgical, precise, deadly. I set down my water glass very carefully and folded my hands in my lap. When I spoke, my voice was calm and steady, which seemed to surprise everyone at the table. I see, I said quietly. And when did you make this decision? Well, Harrison said, clearing his throat again, we've been discussing it for some time.
Don't, I said sharply, and he immediately fell silent. Don't you dare try to manage me right now, Sterling. How long have you all known about this decision? The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Ophelia spoke up, her voice barely audible. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years. For 2 years, they'd known they were going to cut me out of the family legacy, and they'd let me continue showing up to these dinners, continue calling every Sunday, continue believing that I mattered to them at all. For 2 years, they'd been laughing at me behind my back. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my emerald dress, and looked around the table one more time. At my parents, who were watching me with barely concealed impatience, as if my reaction to their betrayal was an inconvenience they were eager to get past. At Sterling, who couldn't even do me the courtesy of meeting my eyes. At Celeste, who was still pretending to be absorbed in her phone. At Ophelia, who was now crying delicate tears that somehow managed not to smudge her perfectly applied mascara. Well, I said finally, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent dining room, I suppose I should thank you for finally being honest with me. Vivienne, my mother started, but I held up my hand. No, really, this is actually a gift. Because now I know exactly where I stand, and I can respond accordingly. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, cream-colored paper with the Blackwood family crest embossed in gold. Inside was a check for $50,000, money I'd been saving for months to give them as an investment in Dad's latest business venture, money I'd been planning to surprise them with tonight. I set the envelope on the table and pushed it toward my father. This was going to be my birthday gift to you both. $50,000 for the new commercial real estate fund you've been developing. I've been saving for 8 months, living on ramen and store-brand cereal, working overtime every weekend just so I could contribute something meaningful to the family business. Harrison picked up the envelope and looked inside. His eyebrows rose slightly. $50,000 was more than he'd probably expected from his boring, practical middle daughter. But now, I think I'll keep it, I continued, plucking the envelope from his hands and slipping it back into my purse. Since I apparently don't matter enough to warrant inclusion in the family legacy, I don't see why I should contribute to building it. Vivienne, Cordelia said, her voice sharp with warning,
You're being dramatic. Am I? I asked, tilting my head thoughtfully. I don't think so. I think I'm being practical. You know how I am about being practical. I walked around to where my mother was sitting and leaned down so that my face was level with hers. You want to know what I think? I said softly, so softly that everyone had to strain to hear me. I think you're absolutely right. I don't matter. At least, not to you. But you know what? That works both ways. Because if I don't matter to you, then you don't matter to me either. And that, Mother, is going to be a much bigger problem for you than you realize. And with that, I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind 32 years of trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to me. But I wasn't done. Not even close. What I said next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. I stood in the marble foyer of the Blackwood estate, my hand frozen on the brass doorknob, trying to process what had just happened. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the sudden silence, each second feeling like an eternity. Had my mother really just said those words? You don't matter? You never have? My first instinct was to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd, so completely contrary to everything I'd believed about my family for 32 years, that my brain couldn't immediately accept it as reality. This had to be some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding, maybe even a cruel joke. I turned around and walked back toward the dining room, expecting them all to burst into laughter, expecting someone to shout, "Surprise!" or "Gotcha!" But as I reached the doorway, I could hear their voices continuing the conversation as if I'd never been there at all. "Well, that went better than expected," Sterling was saying, his voice carrying that satisfied tone he got when a difficult business meeting concluded successfully. "I thought she might make more of a scene," Celeste added, and I could hear the clink of silverware against china as she continued eating her cake. Emotional. They thought I was emotional. The woman who had spent her entire adult life being the picture of composure, of reliability, of steady-headed practicality, and they saw me as emotional. "She'll get over it," Cordelia said dismissively. "Vivienne always does. She's nothing if not resilient. That's her one useful quality." Her one useful quality, resilience. Like I was a piece of furniture that was good at withstanding wear and tear. "Are you sure we shouldn't have eased into it more gently?" Ophelia asked. And for a moment, I felt a spark of hope that maybe someone in there actually cared about my feelings. "Nonsense," Harrison's voice boomed. "Ripping off the Band-Aid is always better. She needed to know where she stands. It's actually kinder this way." Kinder. They thought destroying my sense of self-worth and family belonging on my birthday was kind. I pressed my back against the wall outside the dining room, my heart hammering so hard I was surprised they couldn't hear it. This couldn't be real. These couldn't be the same people who had raised me, who had taken me to piano lessons and school plays and graduation ceremonies. The same people whose approval I'd spent decades trying to earn. But as I listened to them continue their casual conversation about my irrelevance, I realized something that made my stomach drop to my feet. This wasn't new information to them. They weren't discovering these feelings in real time. They'd known this about me, that I didn't matter, that I was just the resilient one who could handle anything, for years, maybe my entire life. Every birthday dinner, every Christmas morning, every Sunday phone call where I'd dutifully checked in and they'd responded with polite but distant interest. They'd been going through the motions, playing their parts in a family drama where I was cast as the expendable supporting character. "Should we save her a piece of cake?" Esperanza's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, and I could hear the genuine concern in her tone. At least someone in this house still saw me as human. "Don't bother," Cordelia replied. "She won't be back tonight. Vivienne likes to process things alone. She'll probably drive back to Brooklyn and spend the evening analyzing what went wrong, making lists of ways she could have handled this better. That's what she does."
They even had my coping mechanisms figured out and cataloged. They knew exactly how I'd react to their betrayal because they'd been observing me like a laboratory specimen my entire life. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house 2 hours ago. Something fundamental had shifted inside me when those words left my mother's mouth. Some essential part of my identity that had been built on the foundation of family love and belonging had cracked open. And what was emerging from the wreckage wasn't the resilient, practical Vivienne they thought they knew. It was someone harder, someone colder, someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I walked quietly to the front door, slipped out into the cool October night, and got into my car. But I didn't drive back to Brooklyn like they expected. Instead, I sat in their circular driveway, staring up at the warm yellow lights glowing from the dining room windows, and I started making a very different kind of list. Not a list of what I'd done wrong, or how I could fix this, or ways to earn back their approval. A list of exactly how I was going to make them regret the day they decided I didn't matter.